am Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It by Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, September 12th, 2025. Got lots of great stuff coming up for you in this show. I have got a cool story that we're running on Rawlings and Pinnacle, the funeral consolidators, and another story that kind of brings up some aftercare things that we'll talk about in this episode. But before we get to that, let's listen to this message from our friends at NGL. Head to the National Guardian Life Insurance Company booth at this year's NFDA convention in Chicago to meet keynote speaker and pianist Felipe Gomez. Plus, be on the lookout for a big musical surprise as you head into the exhibit hall. For over 116 years, NGL has focused on providing pre-need insurance that hits all the right notes. Stop by booth 1639, that's 1639, October 26th through 29th to learn more. So first up, a little plug for what's coming up in this week's Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter. We have a feature on Rawlings and Pinnacle, which are kind of the same company, but they weren't always the same company, but they were always kind of the same company. So if that sounds convoluted, you should read the story because the story makes it nice and clear. But I got to speak with Tony Cumming, who is the president, and I got to speak with the director of operations, Chris Hamill. And one of the things that we talked about, in addition to, what they're doing and their plans for growth and all, is the possibility of what funeral service is going to look like in the more distant future. And Chris brought up this notion of, central embalming places. And not that they don't exist now, but, that they're going to be flip-flopped. He said when he first started as a funeral director in Iowa, if somebody wanted to be cremated, they had to drive the body an hour. And he thinks that could flip, not tomorrow, but the signs are there. But there's more to it than that, I think. So we can carry on that conversation at a later time. The other feature that I wanted to point out is I spoke with Matt Van Drimmelen, and if you are a regular podcast listener, you would have heard his episode a week ago, a little bit more. I'm talking about turning compassion into long-term value. He was giving a little bit of a sneak preview of a talk that he's going to be giving at the Kates-Boylston Advances in Funeral Innovations Conference. There you go. It is on November 12th. It is in Detroit. And if you want tickets and you want to get $50 off when you register, you just register and put in the code FSI50. That's F like funeral, S like service, I like insider, 50 for $50 off the registration price. And the early bird special will be ending sooner than you think. So if you get in now, you can save even more money. I guess that's a commercial. I didn't mean for it to be. But anyway, let's get into today's stories. So last month, you'll remember I spoke about a feature that I wrote about Carriage, which has kind of got itself all ready to go forward and make some big acquisitions. I spoke with its CEO, Carlos Quesada, and he said, yep, we'll have an announcement in September. Well, on September 9th, Carriage announced they acquired 5 businesses in the Orlando, Florida area. There's a link in the show notes with a list of all of the funeral homes, but it was, we promised and we delivered. Of the five businesses, they include, I think, 6 funeral homes and 1 cemetery, a crematory, and a central care center. See, we just mentioned the central care centers. So this is a big deal for Carriage, and I think that they're going to be very excited to have kind of made this. And of course, there's going to be some transitional stuff going on, but I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next, because if they're just going to do this one huge buy every quarter. It'll make it easier to cover, if nothing else. But anyway, there's a link to it. And they didn't mention what they paid. Nobody mentioned what they paid, but there is a link to the press release in the show notes. If you are a subscriber to Funeral Service Insider, the newsletter, I've got a couple of really kind of longish, reimagined press releases about what's going on in Texas, because what's going on in Texas is exhausting to write. Some people said I'd have to move to Texas. Other people said, I bet you're glad you don't live there. Maybe a little bit of both. There's this Kristen Tips story and the concomitant shenanigans are too much to go over for me today. I will tell you though, I want to give a heads up to the local news, the KERA news. I don't know if they started out by not being fans of Miss Tips or if Miss Tips made them non-fans, but they are watching very closely. And this week, I don't know if there wasn't anything there was stuff to write about, and we'll get into what there was to write about in a second. But one of the things that they brought up was that the accusations made by Mr. I can't recall his name, by the former executive director, that she was lobbying to be not regulated. They're considering whether or not that's legal. Actually, they're alleging that this is potentially constituting illegal lobbying. So the local news is kind of on it, and they talked to some legal experts, and the legal experts are like, today's day and age, I don't know if we have a government, so whether there are laws is kind of up for grabs. But we put the pieces together. What we do in journalism, the best we can do is just put the pieces together, and people can pick them up or they can ignore. And more often than not, they don't. But that doesn't make the work not worth it. So here's to my friends out there in Texas doing the Lord's work, following Ms. Tips, and making sure that you're not going to get government isn't held accountable anymore. It's not really what we do in this country, but keeping alive the mechanism that could help to hold government to account is still important work. So good for them. On to the next Texas story, which is kind of related. Desiree Wilson, we've spoken about him. I actually looked it up. I did talk about this when it first happened, which was back in 2023. Desiree Wilson had tried to get his funeral director license. He had worked in Dover, which is not far from me, as an embalmer. He worked in New York during COVID, picking up embalmings, in the overwhelmed world that was New York City during COVID. And then he moved to Texas, where he wanted to open his own funeral home. He opened his own funeral home. The Texas Funeral Service Commission said that he met the requirements to be a funeral director there, which are you have to pass the test. He passed it 100% first time, as has been reported. And you have to have served in the military. And the NFDA actually has a program, for getting military people to get funeral director licenses to make it a little bit easier. And so they did it, and he opened his funeral home, and then they came back and they said, yeah, you know what? We were mistaken. Give your license back and we're going to review it. And that was in 2023. Recently, the judge recommended that the Texas Funeral Service Commission grow up and stop being such big babies. They were strongly suggested to restore this man's license. Of course, it is their decision in the end, but if they don't do it, I guess they could be legally liable. It doesn't. Again, the Texas Funeral Service Commission doesn't impress me as a body that really cares one way or the other whether things are required of them. So I don't know why this would make a difference. But again, do the work, see where it falls. So we'll link to both of those stories in the show notes. There were a ton more stories, and we'll get to one or two more, but like I said, I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter than I have been in the past. This is a story I wanted to tell because I don't often get to change my mind mid-story. So the headline is Deceased Pets Found in Colorado Springs Storage Unit. The story goes like this as I read it. The first time there was a funeral director, well, not a funeral director, there was a pet crematory operator. His name was Marcus Williams, and he apologized. He got far behind with his work, and so he brought a freezer to a storage facility, and he was putting the overflow animals in the freezer. And now he was clear, or he thinks he was clear, that the overflow was for wild animals and non-pets that he was required to dispose of. But he didn't pay for access to the electricity. So the storage, extra space storage, unplugged him, and the things went poorly in the freezer, and he came out and he was, again, supposedly contrite about it. There's a link in the show notes. You can read his letter that he sent to the press and apologizing for not paying attention to the lease and for being a little careless, and reiterating that these weren't people's pets. They were still creatures. That's a conversation from another day. But Melissa Volare, a veterinarian with Transitions Veterinary Service in Colorado Springs, said that she had already broken off her deal with them, with Mr. Williams, because what's reported is because of red flags that she saw. Now, whether these red flags were him using this extra space for extra animals or something else, there's no way to know. But one wonders, I mean, we will take him at his word, and are happy to take him at his word, but we'll see if this story has legs, because there is an ongoing police investigation. So if they discover that anything that I've told you wasn't true, I will come back and I will tell you what it was. Till then, check out the link in the show notes. All right, two last quick ones, and we are going to call it a day. The first one is that the College of Southern Nevada's first ever funeral service program started this week. If you are a subscriber, you know that we may recall that we covered the idea of this opening. We spoke with Raymond Gibbons Jr. about the program. He is the program director. And we also spoke with Selena DeLulo, who is the president of Palm Mortuaries and Cemeteries in the area. And she was very excited about the program, and she did a lot to help get it started. Palm Mortuaries is a Dignity property, so she was able to, Service Corporation International elected to donate $70,000 to get the program up and running. And one of the first of the 11 students is a Palm Mortuary employee, not a funeral director, obviously, but I guess a funeral assistant at Palm Mortuary. And there's a nice video if you want to take a look at the link in the show notes. It's a television report. So to bring you to the video, you can see they talked to a couple students, one older, one younger, and it's very cool. So congratulations, Mr. Gibbons. We spoke. You're a good guy, and I wish nothing but the best for you and your program. The other story that I wanted to tell really quickly was the Mortimer Funeral Home in Thermopolis, Wyoming, has ended its ambulance service after nearly 80 years of operation. And, this is one of those things that some people, I guess most people, if you're listening to this, you probably know that in many places for a long time, the funeral director and the ambulance driver were the same person. And that just really had to do with the shape of the car and the availability, the 24-hour availability, and especially in rural America. And I wonder how many more funeral homes are running ambulance services as well. If you have one, if you know of one, let me know. I wish that I had heard about this before it closed, because I think it would have been a really cool feature to do. And I would love to talk to someone who's running a funeral home and an ambulance service. I can't imagine the paperwork. I mean, it must be significant. But that will do us for this time. In Case You Missed It by Kates-Boylston is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited and videoed by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. If you follow the link in the show notes to the show notes, there's a button that says follow. If you click on that button, it will bring you to every conceivable podcatcher. You just click on the one that looks like the one on your phone, and now you're subscribed. And that way, you don't have to stumble upon this if you have stumbled upon it. If you're a regular listener, thank you so much. I was very proud to report this week at our meeting that our listenership continues to grow. And we had a nice little bump now that summer's over and many of you apparently are back from vacation. I don't blame you. I don't listen to me while I'm on vacation. Why would you listen to me while you're on vacation? So welcome back from vacation. Let's have a great school year for those of you who are having school years. And let's just continue to punch through the grind until it's Christmas for the rest of us. We got Halloween, I guess, is a big deal. But anyway, we will catch you next time.